Welcome back, representation fans. It's Jeff Mayhew here from No Cap Fund. We've got another great podcast for you. This week we have Kevin R. Kosar as a guest from AEI. We discuss why Congress is broken and what we can do to fix it. All right, welcome. We are live, Walter. It is the No Cap Space live stream representation station. We haven't come up with a name yet, and we have a guest on our show today. It is Kevin R. Kosar from AEI. Kevin is pretty well-read guy. He's a senior fellow of AEI. He's written, or the co-editor of Congress Overwhelmed, and he brings a deep insight into the structural challenges we face with Congress. He studies the administrative state, American politics, electoral reform, and the U.S. Postal Service. Kevin, thank you so much for joining the show today. How are you doing?
Jeff, Walter, thanks for having me on. I'm doing well. I confess my body is a little bit sore because I've spent much of today digging in the yard. We have some trees in the neighbor's yard. I have shot roots underneath the backyard. It's screwed up the drainage. It's screwed up a lot of things. And so I am out there with a pick and a shovel, and I am digging. But it's good to be with you back in the air conditioning.
You had to live the old school life today, like get down in the soil with your hands, right?
Yeah, well, I should say to the audience out there, I'm beaming in from my basement in Cuyahoga Falls, Ohio, a little blue-collar town that's just north of Akron. And this is where I grew up. My professional life in Washington, D.C. at the American Enterprise Institute, I and my family are down there from September through June, but every summer I bring them back here to Ohio so that my kids can get out of the DMV bubble and to rub elbows with regular Americans. And to play in the dirt.
I think it's something all people need is to play in the dirt at some point in time.
Absolutely. Otherwise, you get alienated from the natural world, and that leads to an unhealthy mindset, I think.
So how did you get into studying Congress at AEI? Like, what brought you to that spot?
Well, it was to some degree accidental. I got my PhD in politics at New York University. I had planned to be a professor of political philosophy, teaching undergraduate students the great old books, Plato and Aristotle, all the way up through the 20th century. And I got to the cusp of my dissertation, and I realized that the job market was absolutely terrible for political philosophers. Nobody had much use for them. And I thought, all right, well, I should try to do something a little more practical. So I switched over and wrote a dissertation on how Congress had handled the kindergarten through 12 education policy over the past 6 or 7 decades. And that kind of got me into the study of Congress. And then, again, the job market was not great when I'd finished the dissertation and the doctorate. And so I got the pleasure to get a job inside the Library of Congress working for a special unit called the Congressional Research Service, where I was a nonpartisan civil servant who, my research agenda was driven by whatever Congress wanted to know or whatever I thought they should be aware of. And I did that for more than a decade. And that gave me a really good firsthand education kind of beyond the books. And beyond the microfiche and all the other stuff I had my head in back in those days, and taught me a heck of a lot about how Congress works. And then after doing the civil servant thing, I stepped away to the private sector. I privatized myself, joined a think tank. And that's what I've been doing the last decade. And it's from this private sector perch that I've been able to take an outside look at Congress and freely kind of just say what's wrong, to the best of my knowledge, and also to advocate for improvements, which is something I certainly couldn't do as a civil servant.
Ooh, so that's a great starting point for us. What is wrong with Congress? I think we can all agree on that. We listened to a podcast. I think Walter and I both listened to it this weekend. Jonah Goldberg, The Remnant. I think it was Chris Stalwart. Am I pronouncing his name right? Was a guest on there, and that was a big topic. Is Congress isn't working, and they had ideas, but what about you? Like, what do you think is wrong with Congress? I know you co-edited Congress Overwhelmed, so I have a little bit of idea, but share with our audience.
Sure. So, there are kind of three major hypotheses for what's wrong with Congress. I call them the three Ps. It's the people, namely you're just electing people who are not very good at the job or who are of bad character. It's the parties, there's a duopoly, there's something dysfunctional about the parties themselves. They're elitist, they're out of touch, they're captured by their left and right wings, etc. And the third P is polarization, which, is expressed in different ways. Some people will say, well, we're a red and blue America, so Congress is simply reflecting that red and blueness. I don't think that's quite accurate. There's some truth to it. A more accurate version of the polarization thesis is that elites, governing elites in media are polarized. And they have a way of driving the conversation and driving a lot of the political behavior and governance decisions. And, the three Ps explain what's wrong with Congress. I added a fourth to that, and I did that with Professor Timothy LaPura, who's at James Madison University, and Lee Drutman, who's at the left-leaning New America think tank. And we basically said there's also, in addition to the three Ps, a capacity problem. If you look at Congress as an institution, or if you like business school talk, a firm, ask basic questions about it. Are its people motivated to do the work expected? Do they have good technology? Do they have internal processes that lead to results? Are they internally structured in a way that is rational, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera? If you ask those questions, and when you're looking at Congress, more like the answers you're going to get are no, not even close, no, well, a little bit, and no, not really. So there is this element of there being a capacity problem. And you all obviously are highly tuned into one of them, which is that the size of Congress itself and the kind of ratio between the number of elected officials versus the voters has gotten way out of whack, and it creates all sorts of challenges for the people to understand where the voters are at because there are just so many of them.
I would argue that uncapping the House actually relieves the three Ps. Like, it doesn't solve the three Ps, the problem, but it as Walter has put it, is kind of like a stress relief valve. It's like we've got a lot of steam boiling up, and we need to release some of the pressure before we can actually fix some of the other problems. Is we got to uncap the House, and that releases a little bit of that pressure from the three Ps.
Yeah, I tell people that, look, your average member of the House of Representatives has somewhere around 740,000 constituents. Imagine if you were running a business and you had 740,000 potential customers. How well could you serve them with a staff of 18 people, most of whom are fresh out of college? Probably more than half of whom are not going to be in Washington, D.C., who are not going to be working on direct policy-making, law-making activities. Instead, they're going to be responding to, where's my lost Social Security check, or why is the VA giving me the runaround, doing those sort of ombudsman's activities. Like, how are you supposed to be an effective lawmaker for 740,000 people when you got such a small staff? Like, there's just a ratio problem, a performance problem there. And when you put it in those terms, I think it can help people better understand. I mean, think about it as a small business, and small business wants to give good service. Well, if you want to give good service, good luck doing it with that many constituents. It's just really, really hard to know what they want and need and to take the time to listen to them.
Yeah, I have a small business, and I couldn't agree more with that. So I started the business when I was young, and it was actually a point of contention, or something that I struggled with, is as I scaled the business, is being able to scale the employees with it, right? Because it becomes difficult to teach to different people that learn differently. And, if you have to be able to pay a certain way, and the business that I was in, nobody really knows it. So I had to teach them no matter what, right? And I kind of struggled with that. And then the turnover, they constantly kept on changing. And so it was hard to reteach. And so eventually I got to a point where I kind of changed my business model. I reduced the amount of customers so I could focus more on teaching the staff, and then I started to scale the business again, right? Because I understood that I needed a good foundation of structure and being able to teach my employees to scale the employees with the customers. And if I couldn't scale the employees with the customers, then it wasn't going to work.
Yeah. Yeah, no, I
Yeah.
think that's right on. I'm sorry, go ahead, Walter.
I think before we jumped live here, we were kind of chatting about the housing issues in DC, and I think kind of alongside this is this question of if we were to uncap the House, or if we were to add staff to members of the House, like where are they going to live? Where do they find jobs or housing that's affordable? In part because the administrative state has grown so large over the last 100 years that essentially those workers and the cadre of people who are trying to influence them have displaced all of that, and so there are these logistics issues, and it kind of ties into one of the things that we've toyed with, which is maybe if you were to uncap the House, you end up with a House that is broken up somewhat regionally and gets together in DC less frequently. I think Jeff, you've suggested having a piece in Denver and then another piece on the West Coast, right? Just kind of like actually physically breaking up the House a little bit, and then you could have larger staff and in addition to having more members and actually be able to house them, and it also I think presents some of the, or maybe it helps fix some of the potential polarization issues and maybe some of the people issues. I don't know if it helps with the parties at all, other than maybe the primary safe district issue, which we can get into. But I like that you added this capacity issue, because for me it does seem fundamental that I spent time in House Energy and Commerce Subcommittee on Oversight and Investigations, and it was just like a joke, right? Like there were like 5 people overseeing however many billions of dollars and however many different disparate agencies, and it was like we'd send like a nice letter out to request documents, in preparation for hearing, and the hearing itself was just it was a facade. It was a charade of our members just trying to get 1 or 2 talking points, and so that they could market that to their constituents, so that they could get reelected to do it again. But there was never actually any real oversight, because both the staff couldn't do it, and I think the members, frankly, they weren't really interested in real oversight. They were interested in performative theater, and so this this issue of capacity, while I agree that it's necessary to consider, in some ways it doesn't. I'm not sure that it's sufficient to address the problems, because I think that the real issue in some way is kind of in the people category, right? Like that the people that we've been electing to Congress, their incentives are all wrong, right? The incentives just induce them to be kind of Hollywood characters who play to the polarized parties. If they're in a safe district, because all they need to do is win the primary, and when they're responding to almost 800,000 people, their incentives are to talk to the donor class and not really the average person, and so we end up with what I think Peter Turchin or Schumter would describe as elite overproduction, and Jonah Goldberg got into this in his discussion at AEI. And I think it's a good point for us to touch on, which is, that not only are there not like representative jobs that the quote unquote overproduced elite could go to, because they could go like work in the bureaucracy, but in a lot of ways those jobs are not maybe as fairly competitive as an electoral race, and I think more importantly, the overproduced elite don't even feel represented, right? And I think that like this is maybe gets to some fundamental issue, which is if the overproduced elite don't feel represented, then you wind up with people who are, I don't know, happy to have a monarchy or whatever other crazy idea that they can dream up. So I wonder if you've thought much about this question or theory of elite overproduction and how it might play into what's been going on with Congress.
Yeah, I think there's definitely multiple ties. One that kind of sticks out in my mind is, you know, the expectations of elites, those who are generically in the upper class, tend to be higher for just about everything. Um, and you know, we shouldn't have anybody hungry. We shouldn't have any of this. We shouldn't have any of that. This desire for things to be better, 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 that can lead to the habit of relentlessly kind of turning to government to produce programs and the like. Look at the growth of the massive not-for-profit sector that essentially is living off of government grants. This is a whole class of people who are like all in on fixing stuff all over the place, and they're going to take government money to do it. And year after year, the money just keeps flowing, and they just keep applying for the grants, and it goes on and on and on and on and on. And let's be honest. I mean, some of the work is perfectly good, but it just leads to this situation where the expectations for what should be fixed by government keep getting higher and higher, but the capacity to actually deliver on it is not there. Reality always falls short. I mean, think about it. For example, in the 1960s, we declared war on poverty. How many tens of hundreds of billions of dollars have we put to try to make poverty go away? Make hunger go away? Make ignorance forever go away? It doesn't go away. you know, Probably because it's an intractable part of the human condition. And so that expectations and the elites who keep kind of want to just keep doing more, they do create a professional class who populate the government and the magazines and the opinion making sphere, and those expectations are just there, and it is out of touch with what the average person who lives on my street here in Ohio would have to say about what government should do and not do.
Yeah, and I think that, so they talked about that a little bit on the podcast, and they talked about like the different types of conservatism between like Burkean or like Thomas Paine, and this idea of action, that the government is supposed to be energized, and it is a purpose for a constitution. It's we want a government that can solve problems, but when the power or the number of people or the type of people become limited in their voice, they're not able to share their experiences and what's going on because there's just not enough people in Congress to hear them, then the expectations are not set properly. They're not realistic, because like you said, the smarter you are, I think sometimes the less in touch with reality you become, because you start to believe, because maybe you've accomplished so much in your life, that you can solve any problem. But and they make this point in the podcast is like poverty is kind of we are poor people, right? Like we came from nothing. We built this system of wealth and whatnot. And the average state of man is poverty. You're not going to legislate that out of existence. And while we can do things to maybe balance society a little bit, it shouldn't be necessarily like the number one goal of our government. Our government's supposed to do kind of the basics, and let individual citizens do that. And I think nonprofit sector's a great thing to have, but I don't necessarily agree that our federal funds should be funding the whole sector. It should be funded privately.
Yeah. I mean, the expectations for how reality ought to be drives more and more government intervention in those areas. But then, we all know that government is good at some things, but it's not good at others. I mean, that's just a fact. Empirically, we've seen it. There are some things where government can get involved and genuinely improve things, and there are other things where, certainly not at the federal level, it just can't. Yet the expectations keep pushing it to do more, to get involved in a broader range of activities. And, then when things don't work, people get, the bad stories run in the newspaper, the hearings get held on Capitol Hill, and people get further and further down on government.
Yeah. So one of your P's, people, right? So I just brought up Thomas Paine. I've got Rights of Man here in front of me. There's a little quote I wanted to read for you. So, man is not the enemy of man, but through the medium of a false system of government. Instead, therefore, of exclaiming against the ambition of kings, the explanation should be directed against the principle of such governments. And instead of seeking to reform the individual, the wisdom of a nation should apply itself to reform the system. And, I kind of think that's where we're sitting now is like we have politicians, back to the people problem, and they point the finger at the other people that think differently than them or have a different letter next to their name instead of talking about what you are talking about at AEI, which is Congress, what we're talking about at Uncapping the House, which is Congress. They're talking about changing the people constantly. They're never talking about reforming the system that elects the bad people to office.
That's right. That's right. Government is ultimately an instrument, and it's supposed to be producing desirable ends. And if it's underperforming, then you have to think about, rewiring the thing, rejiggering the thing, as opposed to just sticking with the same form and yelling at it and saying, do better. It clearly doesn't work. And the system we have now is most assuredly not the system we had in operation in, say, 1950, to say nothing of 1850 or 1800. It's evolved massively, or devolved, depending on your perspective.
Yep.
Yeah, it's
Roger.
all about collective action. That's the whole point, right? Why have government? Well, there's certain things that individually we can't tackle. There are collective action problems. Wouldn't it be nice if we had a central source that coined money and gave us national defense, as opposed to everybody trying to do it on their own? Like, okay, well, government's supposed to do that. But if it's not doing that, if it just keeps failing in various policy areas, time for systemic change.
Well,
Yeah, unfortunately, we're dependent upon the
with
people in government
this continuing budget resolution. It's like, Congress has the power to tax us, the power to spend the money, and the power to decide, when and if our sons and daughters go off to war. And I think the general sense is that most people have no say on any of those topics, right? Congress is just going to do, half-brained things, and they're going to, they have already delegated most of that power to the executive branch, and that's just going to continue. And so they stop caring about what happens at the state level and at the city level and the county level, and people, stop performing in their jobs. And, one of my, concerns is that if we don't fix the Congress problem, that kind of this sense of learned helplessness it just trickles through everything. And you just finished up teaching a class at Boston University while they were down in D.C. Where are the kids? Are the kids doing all right?
Well, they have very low expectations for Congress, and they do not really think of it as the place where policy gets made. They think the executive and the judiciary are where the kind of big moves in policy happen, which that's a product of what they've seen and the product of their upbringing. The good news is that they are not impressed with what they're seeing, and therefore they seem to be very open-minded about the possibilities for change. I have to say, when I speak to younger audiences, whether it was the Boston U class or the other guest lectures I do, and I bring up the idea of like, hey, the way we elect members of Congress these days with, partisan primaries being used in most states and then later a general election, et cetera, this isn't the only way to do it. And, here's what we're learning about the incentives that are set by this system. I don't get a whole lot of people raising their hands saying, no, this is the American tradition. We have to keep it that way. They're like, yeah, anything should be better than what we're doing. So we all know the children are the future. I think there are real interesting possibilities for governance reform in the the younger generation, because they're just not impressed with the current system and they're not invested in it like a lot of the people who are in Washington right now, who are kind of products of the system.
I agree with that. I've talked to, I think the day that I came to AEI a few weeks ago, I can't remember what event it was, but there were a whole bunch of college kids there. And I get the same impression, and I've talked to a lot of them on Twitter and, in my local community, and they are not impressed. And I think what's important is that there is a group of them that are ambitious. And, as my favorite Federalist, writer, James Madison, ambition must be made to counteract ambition. And I think if they're going in thinking that the job is supposed to be done in the executive and the judicial branch, and they're learning that it's wrong and it's not working, then I think at some point on their own, they will navigate to the legislative branch, and they will focus their energies on fixing that part, because Lyndon Johnson, power is where power is, or something like that. I can't remember the exact quote right now, but there is power in Congress that is underutilized. And that is the biggest thing that average Americans don't understand. And they think that you have to have this strong executive to get anything done. And I think most of us would agree that if you do Congress right, if you have the right people there, you don't need that executive. Their job isn't to be that person. It's supposed to be a representative of the people to get things done. And once those kids figure that out and they move on to that, I think we'll start to get some real change in the country.
Yeah, that's my that is my hope, and that is why I'm spending a lot of time doing things like I released the monthly Understanding Congress podcast. It's really designed for people who are curious about Congress, not experts, but ultimately dissatisfied. And that's why I go out and do these guest lectures. It's a chance to connect with the next generation and to kind of do that Johnny Appleseed thing, casting seeds around and hoping beautiful things will grow up over the long run.
I've got my Understanding Congress mug right here. I'm very familiar with the podcast, and it is exactly. I am exactly the person you are marketing to. I am not an expert. I was curious about the system, and I found your podcast, right? And I've learned a lot. I can't keep up. I mean, there's so much stuff out there, but and I lost my train of thought. Walter, jump in here.
Yeah.
Sabi, Roger, jump in here. Where you been?
Well, what I was going to add is you can go check this out at understandingcongress.org, and I've been checking it out a little bit. My only critique is I don't see uncapping the House, at the forefront of topics under congressional reform. So maybe I can continue to work on you for that. I guess and to that end, I'm interested. What are your reservations about uncapping the House? I know that you support, bringing on more staffers. Why do you think more staffers instead of more members? Give me your thinking here.
Oh, I don't think it's an either or. I think it's a both.
Okay.
I love that answer.
The Senate's a trickier creature because you'd obviously have to amend the Constitution, but the House, increasing the number of legislators was the norm, as you guys know, and we've deviated from the norm for the last century, and I don't think it's been to the better. Do I think that the logistical hurdles are formidable? Not least getting the current members of Congress to agree that it's okay to have more members and smaller districts and fewer voters to serve. That some of them would jump at that. Others would be like, "Hey, no, don't take my power away." But logistics are not an excuse for not trying something. I mean, if imagine if it was middle of '60s and this president wants to put a man on the moon and people were like, "Oh, that's just too hard. There are too many things to figure out. How are you going to get oxygen up there? Blah 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 blah." Nothing would have happened. Come on. So no, I think it's just got to be done because it's never going to get better. The American population is going to keep growing. The ratio is going to get worse and worse, and we don't do ourselves any favor by having a House of Representatives where now it's one legislator for every million people. or 1.5 or 2 million people.
Right.
Yeah, the whole House will lose its character and become increasingly like the Senate.
Don't you think that because and if we look at the different maps that have been drawn for the electoral college, or excuse me, the representation moving from state to state because it's capped, right? As the population in different states raise and lower, California I think lost some seats, Texas gained some seats. Don't you see that as a problem? Because when I got into politics, the first thing that I learned is that the people in politics are the first people that you meet in politics. There's different levels of people you meet in politics, right? But the first level of people, they only care about winning elections. They only care about numbers. And in their mind, anything they can do to put more people in their bucket than the other bucket is justified. They see that as totally legal, regardless if it's legal, right? And I think that if you look at politics that way, and if the people on the ground running the elections look at politics that way, that's kind of a bad thing, right? Because now you're competing for representation in Congress, you're competing for your power to stay, and that can be dangerous sometimes.
Oh, absolutely, absolutely, and yeah, I mean, and for low population states in particular, they're all just ultimately going to be driven down to one person as a representative. Doesn't matter, if they have 5 million people or not. That's where they're going to be left, and that doesn't sound like a good situation. Yeah, no, I mean, I think, one of the things to keep trying to figure out is, and it gets back to the old kind of James Madison notion, is that you can't wish for people to be angels and just choose the right thing. Rather, you want people to kind of draw upon their own selfishness, but be able to link it up with these kind of higher goals that are for the better of all. And so, I think, for example, we all know that the campaign consultants, they love to make money. They make lots and lots of money. Well, gosh, if there are more people in Congress, they could have more customers.
I love that argument.
Pollsters, pollsters, there you go. You got more work to do.
Unfortunately, none of those people have
Sign
a vote in the
makers,
House.
everybody.
I think that's one of the best arguments that could be made inside the DC bubble. And when I'm in that bubble talking to those people, that's one of the arguments I make. Because it's true. A lot of people are always concerned about losing their jobs. Ultimately, the House got capped because there were people that were going to lose their jobs in Congress, and they wanted to keep their job. It wasn't, like the Constitution, right? When we wrote this thing, the main topic was proportional representation. It was about, sharing power and balancing the small and the big states. But as you mentioned, as the capped, now your small states it's creating a bigger and bigger divide. And so if you can encourage people and say, hey, look, I know that when you hear about uncapping the House, you worry about your job, but in reality, you're going to have more customers now. You're going to have more opportunity now, right? There is going to be, maybe the top contenders of the consulting world don't make as much money, but there will be more businesses created and more different people will make more money. The total amount will go up.
Mm-hmm.
Well, and I got to say, the economic value of trust is in some way limitless. Like, it's the foundation of the system, right? Building trust both internally but also externally, right? I mean, we can't forget that a weak America, an unpredictable America, is not a tremendous trading partner. It's not somebody that our allies necessarily want to make another treaty with. If we are constantly just at the whims of an executive who can change their mind every 4 years, or halfway into the 4 years, it just doesn't create stability for the economic engine. And you look at where things are. I think our financial system post 2008, and we're the stock market's still going up, but so the people on Main Street don't necessarily feel that. And I think our trading partners also are kind of like, the American goods that we've been receiving are not quite up to snuff. And we have a lot of questions about whether or not we can continue to trust America. And I just think the value of that is limitless. It is the foundation of all economic relations, is the ability to, trust that you're going to get paid, trust that you can resolve a dispute in a judiciary or a judicial system that, has rule of law. And without that, it evaporates. But, I think going back to the practicalities, Kevin, you're right that, because I walked around on Capitol Hill and I talked to probably staffers in 100 different offices in the House, and their average age was 20. Most of them weren't aware of the reason that we have 435 members, and it quickly became apparent that the actual members themselves are somewhat allergic to giving away some of their power. And I think that it is this real practical hurdle. And so, our approach is, let's just get this into the zeitgeist of the people, right? We have to convince the people, the youth, that, representation is the most important thing, right? Like you're upset about the media. It comes down to representation, because, Congress was supposed to be your primary source of information, not the media. But on the topic of practicalities, you've agreed that we should uncap the House. The second big debate we always have here is, what's the number? What's the magic number of constituents to representative? If you had a magic wand, set aside the practicalities. You as a constituent, what do you think is the right number? And you can couch this in terms of practicalities, or what would be good at the beginning, and where you would like to get at the end. But give me your best shot.
Well, I'm conscious of, we talked earlier, right, Jeff, about scaling up an operation. You start adding a whole bunch more employees real fast. It can create some administrative bumps and some process challenges. So you wouldn't want to jump up to, 4,000 or something like that, But you might want to start with something like 600, 650, something of that magnitude. Get those folks kind of settled into the positions, and then make a kind of promise, almost like the decennial charters revision processes that some municipalities in this country have. Like, just make a promise that 10 years from now, we're going to go back to this and we're going to see what we can jump it up higher to. Well, balancing the kind of administrative challenges that come with this. I mean, I don't think we want to get to the kind of like Star Wars mega legislature sort of stuff. That
Would it not be preferable?
hard to make work? But I should say, one exciting side effect of expanding the House of Representatives is you're going to hit a point where it becomes too big for one speaker to control a majority. And that would actually be a positive development, I think, because I think the House is, to some degree, suffering right now because so much of the legislative work, which should really be done in a bottom-up way, is being scheduled and ultimately completed by the speaker and the top people in the chamber. They are the place where all the bargaining happenings on all the big things, what gets voted on, what's in the package, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And that's led to a perversion of regular order, and it's a problem. At a certain point in time, no speaker is going to be able to fully control a majority if the majority is too big. Right now, they struggle as it is, but you get to that majority where, okay, we're talking about 300, like, it's going to fall apart. And if it falls apart,
is super interesting.
You may have to go back and devolve things down and kind of do well, look, I'm the speaker, I'm not God. We're just going to have to do more regular order and just kind of call up bills in a more perfunctory sort of way, instead of everything being about political calculations of the majority.
So
go ahead, Walter.
Could I jump in? Yeah, I have not thought of this point, Kevin, and I think that it is a really important, brilliant insight for a couple reasons. One is it explains why the Democrats have been so allergic to this because, from like a policy perspective, you would think, Democrats should like the idea of uncapping the House. But when you think about them losing control of their, very, what I think from the outside looking in is very kind of top down control, they don't want to do that. The other reason I think this is important is, Philip Wallach, Yuval Levin, both, they recommend a lot of kind of rules changes within the House. Some of these more procedural, esoteric things that would never be very interesting to the average person, but can be profoundly important. Those are much more likely to happen if you get an uncapped House and that, the freshman set of congressmen that the speaker doesn't have control over, right? They could institute some rules changes that help, ensure that we have these perfunctory kind of reading of bills and you actually get debate. And I think that you're right, though, that that might be one of the best side effects is that, essentially we once again are a bottom up. We are sourcing ideas through bottom up debate. That is the way that the House, I think, was designed to function, and instead today is very much top down. Jeff, go
I'm
ahead.
curious, Walter,
Yeah,
about
so
your assertion that
I wrote like
is
a
my voice
very,
not.
I don't know, outside the box idea of uncapping the House a few months ago. I can't remember. I couldn't even find it on my Substack when you were talking, but I remember the basics of it. And I think I had the number somewhere around 1,300, and I divided the House into 3 different chambers with 3 different speakers. And I did it for almost the similar reasons of what you were talking about, is that it would be difficult for one speaker to manage all of that, and that the authority structure, it needed to be broken up because, and I got this idea based off of Dunbar's number. I think it's Dunbar. It's a British philosopher that, we're a gossip species, right? We speak what we know, we share. The Congress is kind of like social infrastructure, right? And so you can only be able to like communicate. I think the number is like 150 people.
Yeah.
An average person can only like really hold ties with 150 people. So I started to think about, okay, well, if I'm a congressional representative, who do I have to work with and who do I have to communicate to actually be in like touch with my community? And then I tried to make that number as to the number I thought would be effective in representing them. And then I worked on the same thing from the structure of the leaders in that community. It's okay, now you have 1,300 members. You've got over 150 members, and I divided that out to try to fit it in with the 3 different speakers. I'm kind of giving an overview, but like, what would you think about something like that? I mean, we already talked about maybe having a separate Congress. I was thinking this weekend as I was driving through Ohio, Cincinnati might be a great place for a second Congress. A second House, because Cincinnati was such an integral part of the founding of America as we moved westward. And so I thought that might, entice people in Ohio to support the idea, right? And then the other one is, and I also want to clarify something. I know you kind of said something about the Democrats not wanting to do this, but I would like, we've talked about it before on the show. The people in Congress who have actually talked about uncapping the House are Democrats. It's
Yes,
Sean
that's what I'm
Casten
trying to
presented the
say.
bill.
Jesus.
Maria Gluesenkamp-Perez and Jared Golding are on an electoral reform committee that they recommend uncapping the House. And I believe Adam Schiff, when he was in the House, also put forth a bill. So
Sean
and
Casten
again,
put
that would
forward a
put
bill.
the
Blumenauer
third
put
Congress on
forward
the
a
West
bill.
Coast of
Several
California,
Democrats
right?
put forward
If you can
bills.
get California, Ohio, and Virginia all on board with this, which Virginia might be the toughest because they'd be giving up power. But Virginia's done that before. That's how we got here, is Virginia ceded the land westward of the Ohio Valley that allowed the country to grow because they saw the benefit of the growth, and also they understood, I think, the struggle of maintaining that much responsibility.
Yeah, it's an intriguing idea, and it could pull our politics back to the sort of regional politics, which was the norm prior to the 20th century. I don't know. I'd have to think more about it. Certainly, I think one thing that's really integral to the whole conversation is just asking yourself, what should the job of the speaker be? I mean, the Constitution just says, they shall choose a speaker. It doesn't lay responsibility. It's just the idea that, okay, you got to have somebody presiding. And that could be just a very, very tiny job. Literally, it's just somebody who sits up there and says, "Okay, you're first. You get to speak next. You get to go next. Oh, day's done. Gavel down." It could be one of those type positions, but it's now a position where the speaker is huge as a manager of, this entire house complex. Has got Capitol Police to deal with, is a party leader, is a top fundraiser, schedules legislation, does this, does that. I mean, it just goes on and on and on and on and on. The job is. I interviewed Kevin McCarthy, or not Kevin McCarthy. His predecessor on the Understanding
Ryan.
Congress podcast, Paul Ryan. I interviewed Paul Ryan, and I was just like, lay out all your job responsibilities when you had the job, and he was just like, it was just so much, and it was like this was not done by intention. This is just like job responsibilities growing by aggregation, and it kind of gets back to the running a business thing. Like, if somebody has more and more tasks layered upon them, layered upon them, layered upon them, ultimately it doesn't work. They're just not going to do any of the stuff particularly well, and you have to ask yourself, okay, what should they really be doing? And so the whole conception of the speaker, the modern one, is kind of freakish compared to the rest of our history. We saw the czar speakers 100 years ago, but they were kind of a flash in the pan. They were not. That's not the norm of the model. And so, yeah, anything going forward that may kind of move us away from that sort of model could be a healthy thing.
Who do you think has been? Oh, sorry. Go ahead, Walter.
Go ahead.
Oh, who do you think has been the best speaker, like in the history? You just mentioned like the czar speakers, and some people might pick them because they got a lot of things done. But like in your study, who's your favorite? Where's the model we should look towards?
Yeah. Well, it's also, I mean, the changing of the times. People have to change tactics. I mean, here's what I mean. I'm sorry to give a complicated answer. Basically, for a 40-year period of the 20th century, the Democrats were always the majority in Congress, right? And when you're always the majority in Congress, and it seems like a demographic inevitability that you're still going to be the majority 2 years from now, it means you have to worry a little bit less about kind of playing to the voters in the short term, and allows you to do more bipartisan, long-term sort of stuff. Having speakers who allowed for that, who thought that was normal and healthy. These days, that seems like a luxury to a speaker. Speakers are like, okay, 2 years from now, I may be out. Our majority may be toast. Donors are going to be pissed at me. I have to do everything I can to stick it to the other side and to maximize my party's chances at winning. And so I can't do bipartisan stuff. So their incentive structure is very different from that earlier era, which is going to be different from another era. And so they're, to some degree, they're playing. Their excellence is within the game that they're playing of the era, and so it makes it hard to compare people. But I would love to be able to kind of move back to a different era where speakers had little fewer responsibilities and expectations on them.
This the issue of the speaker makes me think about the whips. Whips aren't in the Constitution, right? That's just an invention. So I mean, we could have other deputies and a number of deputies, I guess, to help organize things. And I think, Jeff, you're right on the Dunbar's number thing. It's something I've thought a lot about, and I think that it is kind of the right way to try to organize. Be they a business or a governing body. So I think that makes good sense. There is that they're there. When we kind of dive into the layers, one of the things that I get focused on are definitions, and it's I'm a lawyer by training and trade, and so definitions end up being, important both in statute and legislation, but just kind of like philosophically. I was trained as with a BA in philosophy from my undergrad. And so we've been trying to hone in on a definition of representation, something that would encapsulate what it means to be a legal representative, right? But also an electoral representative. Yeah, we're all reading the concept of representation. It was a Philip Wallach recommendation, and it was her thesis for her PhD in philosophy at Berkeley. And so I wonder if you have a definition of representation that you kind of work with in your head.
No, nothing particularly explicit. I mean, I think a representative, on the one hand, does have to represent the interests of constituents to the best they can. But that doesn't mean just merely reflecting them. You're not supposed to be just a delegate. You are also to act as a trustee.
Hmm.
And as a trustee, yes, we know that, voters can get whipped up into passions. There could be something that they're like, do. This should be done right now. But actually wouldn't be in their best interest. And so you have to, and that's the tricky thing. I mean, and that's one of the things that drives me crazy about populism, because it wants to say like, oh, the people have a fixed opinion and we should just do what they want. I'm like, well, yes and no.
Yeah.
So there's an element of, and part of that is when you're in the trustee role, and let's say your constituents are like, we should just abolish all foreign aid because we're just wasting money on the rest of the world when all the money should stay here in America. You could just be a demagogue and placate them and tell them they're right and whip them up. Or you could say, yeah, I hear you, but then engage in a very smooth educational process by which you say, well, here it is as the sum of the total budget. Here's why some people think it's advantageous to help this nation or that nation because they're helping us in this way. And that's part of leadership. And so, yeah, it's this mixing of representative, trustee, with also the ability to lead. It's tough business, man. I mean, you're trying to read people's moods and figure out to what degree you can persuade them and to what degree you have to just kind of capitulate. We saw people, it was particularly acute during the Trump impeachment votes in the Senate, where you saw senators who were like, man, I think I should vote for impeachment. But then they were looking at their voters, especially their primary voters, and they went, GOP guys were going, I'm looking for a good legal way to weasel out of this. To say case not proven or something like that.
Right.
Yeah. Do you want to be a leader or do you want to be just reflect? And it's tough.
So you mentioned something there about like you could just placate the people, like, and you make up a good point. Sometimes the people don't know what's best for them, and it's not because they like are bad or stupid. It's because they don't have all the information, and it's kind of the representative's job to give them the information. That's a lot of the point that Walter's, making with, trying to come up with a definition for it, right? Is in saying like it was an educational way. It was their job to inform the people. And I think of it like, again, with my small business, right? We do screen printing, T-shirts, logos. And sometimes a customer will come with something and it may look great on paper, but it's going to look terrible on a T-shirt. And it's my job, staff, to make sure that they give them the information they need to make an informed decision, right? They may still decide to go with the really bad thing, and because we're a business and they're paying us, we'll do it, right? But at least we have the backup of like, hey, we told you it was going to be bad. We told you what was going to happen. And they're not upset when that happens, and they're happy to repay. But most of the time, people are really happy to be informed. They're like, oh, I didn't know that. I didn't think about that. Because they're not an expert in screen printing, the same way that I'm not an expert in landscaping or I'm not an expert in these things. And they're looking for somebody to represent them and their business in an appropriate way. That's why they want to shop, at our shop or with another business that thinks the same way. And I think back to the trust thing that Walter's talking about, that's what we need in government. We need to know that when we go into that office and we talk to those 20-year-old kids, they're not going to turn us away because we don't advance their career. Right? Like they need to actually listen to what we're saying or educate us on why they disagree with us.
Right. Yeah, no, H.L. Mencken, you no doubt recall, said that democracy was the theory that should give the people what they want, good and hard. And yeah, and to some degree, there are going to be instances where the people are going to be in a majority of people are going to be in a place where a member cannot bring them around, and a member will have to carry water for them. And
Mm.
if there is a negative consequence of that, well, that is one way that humans learn is by making a choice and then going, oh, that wasn't such a good idea. We supported price controls in 1972 or something, and Nixon signed it into law, and guess what? That didn't work out so great. Okay, well, we thought we wanted price controls because we were mad about inflation, but when it didn't work, we learned. Sometimes that's the way it's got to go.
Mm. Yeah. So my working definition of representation is a voluntary, bidirectional, educational, and action network. And so people are educating, being educated, and taking actions. And it's a cycle, right? Just like you said, sometimes you have to make bad choices, and that's your education. That's how you learn. But I do think that the education piece is really crucial. And I want to connect this for you and for our audience again, which is that you know I would argue basically up until World War One, our federal representatives in the House spent a great deal of time of educating their constituents. That was actually part of it, right? They were trying to convince their constituents that the actions that they were taking made sense, that they were logical in some way. And basically, invention of radio, invention of TV, Congress then capping itself kind of said, okay, actually we're going to have the executive make a bunch of our laws, and we're going to have these new media platforms do a bunch of the educating, right? And so it allowed for, the executive to say, hey, we're going to do this, and hey, media folks, this is why we're doing it. Please get the word out. And it worked. I mean, to their credit, right? It worked really well, and it's super efficient. It's not to say that it didn't create the world's greatest economic engine, right? It did. It just happens to be somewhat fragile if all of a sudden people are like, I don't know, I don't know which way is up, or what is true or not, and I don't have any trusted ways to get information anymore. And so I think that this idea that Congress or the House of Representatives, in no small way, in that capacity as trustee, right, that means I'm supposed to trust them when they educate me, as opposed to believing that they're just serving me up a dish of get me reelected. So I focus on that because I think the foundation of a lasting resilient economic engine is trust, and how do we get people domestically to trust again in the wisdom of the science in certain domains, in a policy provision or the next budget bill or a war. How do we get people enthusiastically trusting and supporting those decisions? And I can't think of any other way other than through their representative.
Yeah, I think that's right. That's our whole theory of government. That you'll get unum from e pluribus by working it through a messy legislature where people were going to put together a package that ultimately is not what anyone in particular wants, but everybody can tolerate it well enough. And while that doesn't lead to kind of beautiful policy elegance, it does lead to legitimate government action. And I think one of the tragedies of our current time is that because our Congress increasingly behaves like a parliament, where so much pure partisanship comes into play, that it creates instability, and it also eats at the legitimacy. Oh well, they're just the majority for these 2 years, and they're ramming all this stuff through. I mean, people are cynical, but you know what? They still think the word bipartisan is a good word, for the most part. Very few people say, "Oh, bipartisan means, bad stuff being done by politicians who are all on the take together." Most people tend to have a reflexive, positive reaction when they hear that this piece of legislation was a bipartisan piece of legislation as opposed to it was a party line vote.
I see we're coming up to time. Roger, are you able to speak? Do you want to get a question in?
I don't know. Probably not. Nothing's worked up to this point, so I don't know why it would start now.
we can hear you.
Freaking end of the thing. You can hear me. I've not had a good day, and this technological issue has kind of pushed me over the edge. I'm ready for dinner. I don't have a question. All my questions were addressed. Walter talked about Democrats not wanting to increase the House, and I was like, what are you talking about? They introduced bills in the last Congress, but no. And then Jeff covered it, so it's all good.
Okay.
We're a team here. We got each other's back.
Yeah, well, my point is it's not that Democrats don't support it. I think Democrats do, but the party leadership does not.
Well, does the Republican Party leadership want it? No.
No. But neither sets of leadership like it, I think, for the reason that Kevin articulated.
Right.
Yeah, and that's not to be forgotten, and this is for the purpose of the listeners out there, because you three certainly know it.
I didn't hear all.
Whenever you talk about expanding the House, the question comes up: what will be the electoral process for selecting them? Are you going to just run more partisan primaries, and you're going to get more of the same, or are you going to try something different? And then when you start talking about different ways of electing people, oh boy. Then they get their hackles up big time.
See, I actually think that's a big benefit. By uncapping the House and challenging the different localities to run different types of races, you will get a really diverse House. Because they can, like the primary, you can change your primary, election style depending on what district you are and whatnot. And, when I ran, they did a ranked choice voting primary, but some of them do. We had somebody on doing the 5-star voting primary. I would love to see using the Federalist style of tinkering at the lower level to find out something. We can learn that process through uncapping the House by expanding it and challenging the different localities to tinker with the primary election process or challenging the parties to do so.
It has to be tinkered by both parties, because if it's successful for Republicans, Democrats won't want it. If Democrats have success, Republicans won't want it. It's got to be, both of them have to demonstrate success or failure at the same time, or it will be in the same situation we're in now.
I agree.
Well, I think to the credit of the parties, I think they've done a great job of securing their place in the state primaries for here and evermore, probably.
Yeah.
Well, Kevin, we're at our end of our show. I really appreciate you joining us. It's been a great conversation. For the listeners out there, you can go to a Substack, Understanding Congress. You also have another Substack, don't you?
Oh, man. Yeah. So I've got understandingcongress.org, which is the website that I do for AEI. And then in my own personal capacity, I have Kosar on Congress and Governance as a Substack. And then I have another Substack, which is called Beverages, Books, and More, and is about stuff like this.
Nice.
Yeah, so thank you for coming on the show. And for the listeners out there, if you're interested in uncapping the House, go to our website, y435.org. You can read all about representation. You can read our declaration for representation, and you can sign it. You can be the founders of the next generation of American leadership, and you can help us reform the system. So thank you, and peace and love.
Love and representation.
And representation.
All right.